I wrote the syrup interpreter in a programming language called Haskell, and I was in Livingston Tower in Glasgow when I did it. It runs also on a machine in Livingston Tower that has an Intel processor. But in order to do that, I need a version of the syrup interpreter in Intel machine code. How does that happen? Well, I've come a little bit upwind here to Lilybank Gardens and Glasgow University's School of Computing Science to fill in part of the answer to that. I use a piece of software called the Glasgow Haskell compiler that comes from here. And it's a compiler that translates programs like my syrup interpreter from Haskell into C. And there are lots of C compilers which target all sorts of machines, so there's no problem getting from C to Intel machine code. But the Glasgow Haskell compiler is a program. How does it run? What's it written in? Well, in point of fact, it's written in Haskell. Isn't that a problem? How can we make Haskell programs run if we don't already have a Haskell compiler? Well, the fact of the matter is that for the most part, we do. The new version of the Glasgow Haskell compiler is written in Haskell, and it gets compiled to C and then machine code by the old version of the Glasgow Haskell compiler for generation and generation and generation back more than 30 years to 1989, where the first version of the Glasgow Haskell compiler was written here in a language called LazyML. The fact of the matter is that Haskell programs are data. And indeed, the first thing you compile when you've got the new version of the Glasgow Haskell compiler is that new version itself. Because, the new version will have lots of wonderful optimizations that the old version didn't have. So why would you want your Haskell compiler to go slow? It's just a program. You can feed it to itself, no problem. But that just shows that the origin story of how we get to run programs actually traces back through the decades, building up and up and up, or rather tearing down and down and down, until we actually get to the point where the very first assemblers and compilers were written in assembly language by hand and assembled by hand, like you do, into machine code, loaded almost, by human fingers flipping switches into the memory of machines. We've come an awful long way since then, and that was only the 1940s. Computing science, as I'll say because I'm here, is still a very young discipline, but my, haven't we grown.